We might as well leave the candles burning because it's kind of a sign and a symbol of the light of Christ who dispels all the darkness. And the reason I wanted to start here is because of this amazing picture. And I didn't have my wireless mic, so I'm just using this one. So this is a depiction of the crucified Christ, or the Christ with the crown of thorns. It was done by Charles Elliott, I believe, as he did all the other artwork here on the altar and the candlesticks. And you may notice that half of the face is red and half is black. And it simply is rather a motif of the divinity and the humanity of Christ, and the suffering that God in the flesh of Christ has taken on for all of us. So I thought I would start right here. I don't need this big book, but I actually do have a few notes, and I forgot my glasses. I'll be right back. All right. We have all kinds of little bits of paper, you know. I just write stuff down, and then I go back at it, and then I scribble on top of it, and then I put lines. And anyway, it's a bit of a roadmap, and hopefully this little journey that we go on together, which is on the sorrowful mysteries of the Rosary, the Agony in the Garden tonight, and then the scourging at the pillar, and then the crowning of thorns, then the carrying of the cross, and then the crucifixion. And it took me a little bit to get going on this one. You know, I've never spoke on these or even contemplated them much, the sorrowful mysteries of Christ. I much prefer the glorious mysteries and the joyful mysteries, and then the new ones that St. John Paul II initiated, which is the luminous mysteries of Christ. I really like those ones, but I thought, well, you know, I gotta get down and I gotta think deeply about this cross business and about what Jesus has done for us in the light of what our world is suffering in this pandemic, but also what I think our world, especially the poor, have been suffering enormously for a long, long time, and what the earth itself is suffering, as we've been listening to our Holy Father when he wrote Laudate Si, and just the enormity of what seems to be either self-inflicted pain or pain that's inflicted by others upon others. And just, what was it, last week we had that horrible fire in Lesbos. You know, how many thousands of refugees, they're already in a state of utter pain and suffering, and now all of a sudden their whole world is burned up, and they've got nothing. But I did hear there was a couple of countries that were sort of stepping up and saying, well, we'll take 1,000, you know. So in the midst of some of these horrendous realities, what does show up, and it's important to see what shows up, because the media will not show you what shows up. And what shows up is hope. And that's why I wanted to look at these sorrowful mysteries, because hope does show up. And it begins with the agony in the garden. As I said at the end of Mass, it's a picture that is ingrained in my brain, because as I went to sleep at night as a child, and when I woke up in the morning, that was the Jesus that was looking at me, was the Jesus in the agony in the garden. So I've taken it, the little scripture passage, and I thought we should read it from the Gospel of Luke. And I had it marked, but there it is, found it. So immediately after the Last Supper, as we know, and having instituted the Eucharist with his disciples, he goes out to pray. Then he went out and made his way, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives. His disciples accompanied him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not be put to the test." He withdrew from them about a stone's throw, then went down on his knees and prayed in these words, "Father, if it is your will, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel then appeared to him from heaven to strengthen him. I must note, I have never seen that line in the scriptures before. It just leaped out at me. For whatever reason, the agony in the garden never included an angel appearing to him to strengthen him or comfort him. I just missed it completely. And you know why I missed it? Because pain always overshadows possibilities. Pain always covers up the voices that are hopeful. And so in life itself, when there is pain and suffering, there may well be an angel, but the suffering and the pain in a way are blinding, and we're unable to see it. And in all honesty, it is the first time I have ever noted that an angel appeared to him to strengthen him. So moving on. In his anguish, he prayed with all the greater intensity, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. Then he rose from prayer and came to his disciples, only to find them asleep, exhausted with grief. He said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Wake up and pray that you may not be subjected to the trial." And so that was the agony in the garden. How is it that sweat could become blood? Well, I actually did a little research on it, and apparently in tremendous stress, like agonizing stress, literally blood can sort of come from our pores. It's a medical fact. I've never seen it, but this is the kind of stress that Jesus is under. So what is it that is causing the stress? What is it that is, as it were, causing so much agony or anguish? Well, first of all, I think it's something we do understand. It is the anticipation of something horrible. Something many, many people are familiar with when they get a bad diagnosis of sickness. The anticipation. They're not there yet, but the anticipation of what is possible. And I have seen that, and we've all seen that. We've journeyed with people who have gotten a bad diagnosis, and the anticipation causes enormous suffering, enormous, we would call it existential pain. You know, it's very real. It's and it's also very understandable. So this is part of what Jesus is living. He's living what we at least some people we do know, and maybe ourselves, we've lived, when there is an anticipation of gravity and great sickness. We see it oftentimes with cancer patients. I've seen it with friends of mine who, I think their greatest cross was their brain, their mind. Their mind wouldn't let them rest. And so the anticipation of going down a road that they had seen their father, their mother, their 3 sisters go down causes enormous, enormous suffering. The second reality of this suffering for Jesus is the experience of abandonment. He is alone. His best friends are sleeping. Well, how often are we sleeping? His best friends are sleeping. He's alone. This is a great agony. I don't think there is any greater experience of anguish than the experience of abandonment and being abandoned. And it happens far too often to children. I know for little kids, one of their greatest fears, and I'm no expert in this, but I've just observed this. The greatest fear of a child is that they will be abandoned. You just find a child that's been lost in a mall. Their whole world has completely collapsed. They are inconsolable. The pain that their mother or their father or their uncle, aunt or whoever has lost them. And they are just experiencing abandonment. And this is very, very real for too many people, that there's an experience of being abandoned. And Jesus experiences this. Even though he prays, take this cup from me, not my will, but your will be done. This is certainly a very real intellectual response. But you don't sweat blood unless you are experiencing a deep, deep abandonment. And this is part of his agony. It's very real. And for us as human beings on this planet, for children, for adults, for anybody, I don't think there is a recovery from abandonment. I think there's healing from being abandoned so that we're no longer affected by it deeply, but I don't think there is complete recovery from being abandoned. It's always a wound. The word that we use today is trauma. It's a trauma, and the trauma is extremely deep. I could say to you and to everybody out there in TV land, the number of men and women that I've known in prison, in federal prisons mostly, some provincial, but mostly federal prisons, and a long time. As I joke with people that if I had murdered somebody, I'd be out of jail by now, but I'd be on parole. But over 30 years and still going, and I love it. And one of the reasons I love it is because every single individual that I have ever known or met, and some known very, very deeply, abandonment. Every single one has been abandoned. Abandoned by father, mother, siblings, abandoned by gang. you talk to Father Boyle. He's a Jesuit priest who works with the LA gangs down in Los Angeles. He's got a great book out. Golly, what's it called? Anyway, you can Google Father Gregory Boyle, and he speaks about the recovery and the new life that he brings to people that are living the gang life. The gang life is successful because it's a salvation for abandonment. Someone wants me to belong. Well, it doesn't matter if my belonging means I'm shooting people or dealing drugs or what. None of that matters. What matters is I belong. And so one of the most beautiful things our Holy Father Francis did in his first apostolic exhortation, he talked about, and it goes throughout most of his ministry now as Pope, he talks about accompaniment. That's his biggest thing. His biggest thing. How do we accompany? And why? Because it is the solve and the solution to abandonment. Now, we all experience little bits of abandonment from time to time, it happens to the best of us. But when we are abandoned all the time, every time, which happens most of the time to the poor and to the vulnerable and to the weak and to the marginal, you get really, really sick, really unwell. So Jesus is experiencing that kind of abandonment. And it hurts. It hurts to the point of sweating drops of blood. It does hurt, and it causes enormous disruption in the human family. And so Pope Francis is saying, accompaniment, be close. He always talks about getting close. I mean, we're in COVID time, right? We're all supposed to be socially distant, stay 6 meters apart. And the Holy Father's talking about be close, be close. Well, you know what's shown up in COVID time? We are actually now becoming closer to each other than we were before because we're intentional about reaching out. It's really been something. It's really been something. There's a sign of hope. There's an intentionality about reaching out. Some of the pastors in the diocese, they have actually picked up the phone. Imagine there is such a thing as a phone. You can find a phone in this world. It's not text, it's not email, it's not YouTube, it's a phone. They have picked, and some of them have told me this, they've picked up the phone and they phoned every single person on their parish list. The parishioners have never been so close to their pastors because they got to talk to them. On Sunday, when 700 people zoom in and zoom out, over 60 minutes, and the zooming's even faster, no one gets a chance to talk to their pastor, except for the people that are, they're at a meeting. So that's been one of the things that's shown up. We're going to talk to each other. So we're invited to this, to be aware of how vital or how crucial this question of abandonment is. And the apostles, they sleep on. One of the things that doesn't show up in the joyful or the sorrowful mystery of the agony in the garden, but it's important, is to understand that immediately after that time in the garden there is the arrest with violence and the nonviolent response of Jesus to his arrest. There is the experience of betrayal, and there may be in his agony in the garden, certainly as he was aware at the Last Supper of Judas's betrayal. Second to being abandoned, to the wound of the human heart, is to be betrayed. Oh, and that hurts. Man, that hurts. For us in pastoral ministry, when we're dealing with families and couples, when there's betrayal within the marriage, again, it is a trauma that you do not recover from, but you can be healed of. And there's a difference. But it is a huge trauma, and it's grave when there is betrayal. And Jesus is sweating drops of blood because he's going to experience the kiss. The kiss of Judas. It is a deep, deep agony of the soul for Jesus. The kiss. I've often said, somewhat jokingly, but I think it's quite true, it is perhaps quite easy to defend the church or to defend Christian people from outside threats. But there is no defense for the kiss of Judas. There is no defense. We've witnessed it in the church through the enormity of the suffering of the clerical sexual abuse crisis. The betrayal. And the wound is so great. And so that is why Jesus also suffers this agony in the garden. He is well aware of what betrayal will do to him, and what it will do to the world, what it will do to families, and what it will do to the church. It is easy to protect the flock from the wolves, but it is not possible to defend the flock from the kiss of Judas. It is just, it kills the soul, huh? So where is the grace in these profound agonies? Well, the response of Jesus. This is the grace. There is the agony in the garden, the betrayal. There is the abandonment. And yet, hope shows up just when you think it's all over. Just when it's looking absolutely, this is the last inning, the lights are out, good night. Hope shows up. And it looks like this. As the violent crowd shows up, as the scripture tells us, with clubs and swords, and they're gonna take him by force. After all, this is the king. He's gonna have an army someplace hiding. We gotta go get him. And this is what we see in our cities and our streets. We see this. We've got to have force. We've got to have violence and clubs and swords and so forth. And the world has been gripped by this kind of response to every situation. How often are we going to watch it happen? And it happens to Jesus. You get the kiss, then you get the swords, and his own disciples, the ones who have hung out with him for 3 years, and they should have picked up something, but we must admit they're a rather slow lot, I think. Lord, should we use the sword? They've only been listening to the parables for 3 years. Lord, should we use the sword? And Jesus' response, enough. Enough already. It doesn't work. Enough. And the disciple, before Jesus could kind of get him, reach in and stop him. He sliced off the guy's ear. Enough. In the Gospel of John, put your sword back in its scabbard. And here's where the hope shows up. In the midst of that mob scene, he responds, enough. And he reaches out, touches the ear, and heals the man. The Jesus response is in the agony in the garden and the experiences of abandonment. And maybe this is the church's response primarily. How do we accompany the issues and realities that we all face in this world are, well, they're bigger than me, and they're complicated, and I don't have all the answers. But I know I've got 2 feet and 2 hands, and I can stand next to somebody, socially distant, of course, in COVID times. This is all we are called to do as church. Stand next to somebody. Holy Father Emeritus Benedict will call it consolation, consolatio, to be with in their suffering. I don't have all the answers. And anybody that says they do, you know they don't. But I do have 2 feet, and that creates an opportunity of hope. As Jesus reached out and touched and healed that man's ear. And when there is betrayal, again, a great agony, which causes great distress on the earth, the betrayal of the earth itself, the betrayal of the species that have gone extinct today, the betrayal of the unborn, the betrayal of the elderly, the betrayal within families. What is the response again? It is the hope that in the midst of that, there is, even in someone who is most betrayed, a moment of healing hope, and Jesus exemplifies it as he reaches out, touches the man's ear, and it's healed. So, in some mysterious way, we, the human race, each of us individually, have been given something that in a way we would say, never say never. Never say never. There's something resilient. It's a spiritual resiliency. I have known people, and you have known people, we've all experienced people who have been betrayed brutally, and yet, in another way, in another place, are able to reach out with phenomenal, grace-filled compassion. So the agony in the garden, I think I have a couple of ideas of why that picture was staring at me all through my youth, has deep, deep meaning for what we are invited to as we journey with Mary to the foot of the cross. And in each one of these sorrowful mysteries, there will be opportunities of hope in the midst of what can only be described as profound suffering. So we'll leave it at that this evening. I told Andrea, she said, well, how long will you be? I said, no more than half an hour. Can you hear the ticking sound? You know, the only reason I'm doing that is because there was a wonderful principal that I'd hired her, Shelley McDonald at St. Mary's in Chilliwack a long time ago as the principal, and then she became a superintendent and all of that good stuff in education. And anyway, she was just delightful. And she was a really good liturgist and a tremendous social justice theologian. We've had her over to the diocese a few times. So she is now the principal of an elementary school, and she's only done high school all her life, but she soon realized that kindergarten kids get really squirmy in about 3 minutes. And so when we would have a school mass, you know, and I never took this as an abandonment or a betrayal, okay? But she'd be sitting in the front row, and she was only as tall as the kindergarten kids. And all of a sudden, I would hear this. Where's that? That was her very nice way of, it's time. So I think that it's time, and it's always good to do a little reflection after in our evening mission, but there are agonies for us personally, but for people we know, and the two most profound that I believe Jesus suffered was abandonment and betrayal, for which he sweated drops of blood. It's good to reflect on those places in our lives too, because in those places there will be in our opportunities of hope, and it's important to you just can't run away from that stuff. It's real, and in the midst of these realities, we have good teaching that comes to us. And right now, our Holy Father has given us a word that is vital for the church to hear, and vital for humanity to hear, vital for the people of Lesbos to hear, vital for the people in our institutions, vital for the people that are on a boat that's getting swamped at this moment in the Mediterranean Sea, vital for the people in California and Washington and Oregon, and whose whole towns have been burned up. The word is accompaniment. We don't have answers for these things. We have some ideas, but unless we can stand in solidarity and communion, it's just another program. Well, the church is not about a program. The church, the people of God, are about standing with. And that's the response to the agony in the garden, any of our gardens, accompaniment. Have a lovely evening, and Mary, the Mother of God, pray for us. We'll see you tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Don't turn the channel. Andrea's going to let me know when she turns off the video.